and welcome. This is Business Edge on News Central. I'm Tolulokwe at Dileri Balogun. Our headline stories: Nigeria's Qua Iboe crude exports resume as Exxon Mobil lifts force majeure. Italian prosecutors also now ask that JP Morgan documents be admitted in any Shell Nigeria case. We'll also touch base with a few stories we're keeping our eyes on with NC4 to watch before we finish the show. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now, according to a company spokesman, Exxon Mobil has lifted a force majeure on Nigeria's Qua Iboe crude oil export terminal as crude exports resume for the first time in almost 6 weeks. This after a fire at the terminal halted operations. The Qua Iboe production started to ramp up to normal levels of 200,000 barrels per day in the past week, according to sources, with the release of both the February and March loading programs. Now, data intelligence firm Kepler said that the Very Large Crude Cargo, or VLCC Dania, was also in the process of loading a 1 million barrel stem at the Qua terminal since January the 21st, 2021. This will be the first export of Qua Iboe since December 15th, 2020, and that after a fire hit the facility and injured 2 workers. The company has been under pressure since the closure, and prices have taken a hit as a result of the disruption. S&P Global Platts last assessed the grade at a discount to dated Brent of 50 cents a barrel, down from a premium against the benchmark in December. Bonny Light, a mainstay Nigerian crude, which typically trades at roughly the same level as Qua Iboe, was last assessed at 30 cents a barrel higher. Now joining me is oil and gas analyst Seun Dania. He's going to be part of the conversation today on Business Edge. Seun, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Good morning. Thank you.
All right. So crude is currently selling at about $55 per barrel, which is above the benchmark $40 that Nigeria has on our budget for 2021. So the question to you is, with this, it's obvious that Nigeria could possibly leave recession if this trend is maintained, if the if barrels sales stays around this. But then what do you make of the fact that there's a dependency on external factors that Nigeria doesn't control for this situation?
Thank you very much. It makes sense. Well, currently the price is over the benchmark $40 a barrel, which we're supposed to be celebrating. However, most of the dependencies that lead to force majeures are, so to say, some controllable, well, except for maybe natural disasters and maybe civil crisis. But most of them that we've seen over the years, we notice that it's either from pipeline vandalization, basically insecurity. But the Qua Iboe one is a little bit different because it was a fire outbreak and it was due to maybe negligence on the part of the staff. They didn't follow the safety precautions necessary that were set. So for Nigeria, it's essential that we are able to cross the T's and dot all the I's for everything that we are doing. Make sure that people don't get too confident at what they do, and they ensure that production is maintained. Because apart from Qua Iboe, there are a lot of other terminals, even though Qua Iboe is the biggest one, that if there's any issue, maybe pipeline vandalization or something, it will also affect the overall national production. Output. And then that would affect our ability to sustain our budget at all. Ability to sustain our budget at all. The picture is not necessarily a pretty one, is it? If everything is done to the books, it will be pretty.
Okay, so let's also look at another possible disruption, and that is if output is actually increased and we could now end up with a glut with our oil somewhere just floating around waiting for buyers as it may be. Is that a possibility, do you see, especially in light of the OPEC Plus and the OPEC meeting that we saw in the past few days?
It's a possibility, but everyone in the OPEC and OPEC Plus, everybody understands the need to, reduce the production in order not to flood the market, because it's beneficial for everybody. It's only at the time the challenges have really been, with the development of, renewable energy taking over the use for the necessity for petroleum products, even though there are a lot of other offsets that come from crude oil. Most people focus on, the refined products that we use on a daily basis, and most people are trying to get out all the oil they have right now. But then with America, with the new president who is actually, he's pro-climate change and he has even reducing any oil production on federal property in America. So that will it will increase the dependence on America buying from outside. So that would definitely be a plus for us and other OPEC and oil producing countries.
Okay, so you've talked about one plus and you talked about one possible external actor in this situation, but let's also talk about a few other external actors. Now, top on the agenda are Iran and Libya. The Iran nuclear deal that the Joe Biden government has endorsed, as well as the peace deal in Libya, could possibly lead to more oil on the global markets as those countries also try to recover and work with their economies. What do you think will happen? Do you think because these deals are looking to be deals that are in place, we might see these countries having to put more oil on the market? What could it mean for Nigeria?
So if we look into the details of those deals are actually, to help America with sourcing for their own products.
Okay.
And makes it easier for America to get product without having to go to the global market and competing with the rest of everybody. So I don't really think it would affect the prices. It will not affect the outputs. What's going to happen is more people will, people will produce at the same level.
But they'll still be met with the quota.
Because there's now an increase in demand from America, which of course normally would have triggered like an increase in production from everybody else, but the American market would absorb it. So it shouldn't really affect anybody. Okay,
so let's go back to terminology used at the beginning of the conversation, and that is force majeure. And that is, of course, with the situation involving the Exxon Mobil Qua Iboe terminal. There was a fire, but many people, and myself included, took me a while. Force majeure is a term you typically see involving contractual obligations, and particularly being in use when it comes to the oil and gas industry. So just break it down for those who are not familiar with the terminology. What is it? How does it come into effect? How does one move around in it, especially as it is with contracts and obligations?
So force majeure is a legal term, which kind of protects any contract holder from any obligations, due to factors that are beyond their control. So in the oil and gas sector, there's always, like crude handling agreements, crude lifting agreements that are in place. These are contracts between the terminal and the people who are lifting, because somebody is going to rent a vessel. The vessel is going to sail from a long distance. They're going to be paying the crew. I mean, it costs them money to come and lift product from here. So if something happens and they are unable to lift, somebody needs to take that cost. But of course, once the force majeure is already put into that contract, which is a fire happened at the terminal, it wasn't, out of
it wasn't a foreseen circumstance.
So that kind of like protects the company, Exxon Mobil in this case, because they are the operators of the Qua Iboe terminal. So it protects them. So it is a term that's used even in most other contracts, maybe not termed as force majeure, but maybe we put even in insurance, where people talk about insurance that are due to maybe natural disasters and whatnot.
This 2020 would have been a year of force majeure for many people.
2020, because people couldn't do any business.
But I've seen situations where force majeure can last a while. It can even last a year, if not more than. Yes. This was quite a short turnaround time. Is there anything that accounts for how quickly this force majeure was lifted?
Yes. It's dependent on how fast the companies are able to respond, or how far the parties are able to respond to whatever the issue is. So in a situation whereby, I think in 2016, the same Qua Iboe, because it's a terminal that gets oil from different fields, so everything is acclimated. So there was a pipeline vandalization that occurred, 2016. They had to declare force majeure. I think that lasted for about 2 months, because the pipelines are seabed, so they go underwater from
so
different
before you can
offshore
fix it,
fields,
find it,
So it depends on. So this was a fire. It's before it could have taken less time, but of course you need to fix whatever has been affected. You need to make sure that everything is certified before you can come back to it. So sometimes if it was a massive explosion or a blowout, of course force majeure would have lasted a couple of months. Couple of years, and then where we see that what happens is people start moving their vessels, trying to go to Bonny terminal or the other neighboring terminals to get the product. So it kind of like means you have to give them discounts, because
it's not your fault. It's not their fault either. All right, so before we wrap up this conversation, let's look at the fact that Nigeria is Africa's largest oil producer. And there are many coming at the heels of the country nipping in regards to that. But many feel like we're not benefiting as much as possible from the crude oil that comes out of Nigeria. How do you think Nigeria can benefit more? Is it about functional refineries versus private ones? Is it about bringing on board the modular refineries that we've seen? Is it about maybe even increasing more private investments and bringing on more Dangote refineries, having more people do what he's doing? How do we benefit the most from this natural finite resource?
So as a nation, most of the federal government has, through NNPC, NPDC, they're well structured in a way whereby they own more than 50% of most of the oil assets. So even when they sell, they're only diversifying maybe 40%. So we have crude oil. Now we could make more money from it if we were refining our products locally, because now we're selling the crude oil and
at the very end of the value chain,
and then now spending money to import refined products. But if we are able to refine it, we can refine it, produce gas, sell some crude oil, and that way we're making money from different streams. But of course, it's all political will, all dependent. We have local companies here who have, mini refineries, and they're breaking even, they're making money from it. So even when crude oil prices are low, we're able to make money from the refined products. So as a nation, we can actually, if we the political will to make sure we have refineries up and running, we can, attract a lot of international and even local investors who will build refineries. We don't need to guarantee them crude supply. People will source crude by themselves, and they will build and they will sell, as long as we deregulate the markets completely.
So deregulation and saying political will brought me to what is now my last question on this. We have the PIB or the PIGB, depending on who you ask, which is now Nigeria's longest bill in the National Assembly. That, I guess would say honor went to the Freedom of Information Act before it was signed by President Goodluck Jonathan. But now the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, or the Petroleum Industry Bill, is now the bill that has been before several national assemblies, the longest since Nigeria returned to democracy in 1999. Isn't that a form of corruption in a way, or a form of obvious very lack of political will for this bill to have been in the National Assembly through different dispensations, different ramifications, and now it seems we're almost there? Do you think this bill will be signed this year?
Yes, the National Assembly has actually announced the second reading for the PIGB. I think it'll probably start this week or next week. At the beginning, they did what was necessary, invited all the stakeholders,
the
industry,
IOCs, the communities.
Everybody came together, developed the framework, developed, the base of the document. But then politics goes into it, because at the end of the day, what it is it's trying to reduce the power of the government, break down NNPC, but Africans like to hold on to power.
And there are
when
vested
it seems
interest.
there are a lot of vested interest. So when it feels like someone is taking some power off you, everybody's trying to hold on to it. But they want to be in charge of all the subsidiaries. But the PIGB will make sure that it is well broken down. They act as businesses basically, and everybody's paying every other subsidiary for every transaction that they are doing. That way, investors will be confident that the government is not just going to come and hit them with any bill or any. There's what you call this thing, cash calls. So if you are not the operator of your assets, 60-40, sometimes MPDC operates those assets if the other partner probably doesn't have enough technical competence. So they will always make cash calls. You have to give them money to run the operations, because you now split profits. But for operations, everybody needs to bring in some money. So with this, people will understand where the money is going to, because it's kind of there's still a lot of it's not very transparent. So you make the cash call, you understand what it's going to be used for, but who is paying who? You don't see all the moving parts. But if it's properly broken down, everybody can see which subsidiary is being paid for what service, and then it becomes competitive. I can say, well, no, instead of giving this particular pipeline job to a subsidiary of NNPC, we can contract it to somebody else. It does not have to be NNPC.
All right, so we'll see how that develops. A lot of people are waiting for that. I know communities are also waiting as well, because there is a part of the PIGB that deals with the interests of the communities where this particular asset is extracted. We're going to take a quick time out. When we come back, we get into more conversations about Nigeria's oil and gas industry, and this one takes us to Italy, where there is a court case on that has ramifications for the Nigerian industry. Do stay with us. Now to our next story. Italian prosecutors have asked a Milan court for documents sourced from U.S. bank JP Morgan to be filed as part of a corruption trial over the acquisition of an oil field in Nigeria by Eni and Shell. The long-running graft case revolves around the purchase of the Nigerian OPL 245 offshore oil field in 2011 for about $1.3 billion. Now, prosecutors allege that about $1.1 billion of that was siphoned off to politicians and middlemen. At a public hearing, prosecutors asked the court to accept 2 emails sent to Italy by UK authorities. The emails are from a separate London court case launched by the Nigerian government against JP Morgan Chase, claiming over $1.7 billion for its role in the disputed oil field deal. The first is an email sent by former Nigerian Attorney General Mohammed Adoke to JP Morgan from the email address of a company owned by Aliyu Abubakar, a Nigerian oil man who prosecutors allege paid $500 million in cash as part of a bribe. Adoke sent the bank copies of the resolution agreements regarding the oil field acquisition. Prosecutors said that they considered it relevant to establish the relationship between Adoke and Abubakar. Adoke was charged last year for allegedly receiving bribes to facilitate the deal, and he has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Abubakar's trial will start in coming weeks in Milan. He also denies any wrongdoing. Now, the second email is between 2 JP Morgan officials expressing doubts about transferring $1.1 billion to 2 Nigerian bank accounts. Milan's magistrate said at a hearing that they considered the email significant as it shows there were doubts within the bank over the transfer, which a Swiss and a Lebanese lender had previously refused to carry out. The Milan courts will decide on February the 3rd whether to admit the 2 documents into the case. JP Morgan has declined to comment. It is also not part of the Milan case. The companies and defendants involved in the Milan case, including Eni's current CEO, Claudio Descalzi, have all denied any wrongdoing. Seun, this has been an incredible case to follow over the past few years. Dawn Fortuna is what comes to mind every time I think about this case. Also having implications for former President Goodluck Jonathan as well, and a number of highly placed individuals in Nigeria. We have the PIB that we spoke about before we went for the break, and these are some of the issues that the PIB is meant to address in terms of transparency and reducing corruption as well. But do you think corruption really can be stopped in Nigeria's oil and gas field when you look at this case, how long it's been drawn out, and the number of people involved? Yes, it can. In Nigeria, in 2015, it was easy to see that when the new administration took over, you could see maybe by body language or whatever, things just started shaping up. Our oil refinery started, producing at 70% capacity. But where are they now? Yeah, I mean, it's all gone. So the body language actually ended. So I believe that if we have strong leaders and we build strong institutions, we will be able to curb the corruption. A couple of years ago, I consulted for the Petroleum Directorate in Sierra Leone and their 4th licensing bid round, for oil fields and whatnot. They put structures in place whereby even if you wanted to bribe anybody, it wasn't possible because the processes were extremely transparent. All the bids, all the tenders were open publicly. Everybody could see, and they had professional people on the panel who would actually pick, whoever comes up, in terms of technical finance. There were so many processes in place that even if you ended up bribing anyone, you'd just be wasting your time and your money. And you could see it glaringly. The president was actively involved and made sure that all those sanctions, there were rewards and repercussions properly put in place. So in Nigeria, that's all that's required. We are able to call on. We want to emulate China when it comes to regulating internet and social media. I think we should also be able to emulate China in terms of how to deal with corrupt politicians and government officials. So you've talked about a few lessons from the experience you had. What other lessons do you think Nigeria can learn from this? Because this continues to reverberate in our oil and gas field. Rewards and repercussions always works. Anyone that's performed very well gets rewarded. Anyone who doesn't, anyone who messes up, anyone who's corrupt, who steals, there will be repercussions. We as human beings, we learn from what we see. So when we see someone has done this and didn't get away with it, we're less likely to try it. Less likely to try. But when you see that, okay, well, this person got away with it, this guy comes to the courtroom and he collapses or comes with a brace on his neck,
we tend to start seeing more and more of these things. So people say, well, what's the worst?
It's contagious.
What's the worst that could happen? But if we actually saw most of the cases through, and people who went to jail, not house arrest or any of this kind, actually went to jail and lose their money, lose their assets, people would conform. I don't think our people are so tough in Nigeria. If we actually put in a system that will correct these things, people would align.
Okay, so there's one other issue that has come up, not just with this case, but also with the PNIG as well. Many multinationals seem to prefer settling disputes concerning business that they do and carry out in Nigeria outside of Nigeria. What do you make of this situation, and how can we change that? Systematic issues.
This is all people, even Nigerians, don't trust the judicial system, and they have most of these IOCs spend a lot of money on not just lobbying, but actually gathering intel, gathering information. They partner. I won't want to use the word espionage, but they spend a lot of time. So they understand how these governments work, and people see that you might be frustrated if you actually handle a case in Nigeria. So if you look at maybe Halliburton case, for instance, a lot of people have been jailed in America, but who
has gone to jail here in Nigeria?
Nobody.
Yeah.
So they would rather settle their disputes outside the country, and it seems like our government officials actually have a little fear for international courts and judges, so they would respect that more.
All right, so we'll see how all of this plays out, of course, also involving the PIG bill, the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill as well, and see what happens. A lot of money still can be made in Nigeria's oil and gas industry, but there are issues of transparency, there's issues of reward and repercussions, as Seun has said, that need to be put into place. Seun Dania, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's wrap things up with NC4 to watch, and I'll move out of your way. So we start here. Foreign direct investment inflows to Nigeria declined by 20.21% in 2020 to $2.6 billion amid the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And this is according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. The conference, in its 38th Global Investment Trends Monitor, said Egypt remained the top recipient of FDI in Africa, despite a significant 39% decline in inflows to an estimated $5.5 billion. Finland's ambassador to Morocco is leading a business delegation to explore trade opportunities in the Tangier region from January 27th to the 29th. According to a statement from the Finnish embassy in Morocco, the ambassador will travel to the region along with a team from Business Finland, which is a public organization for innovation, funding, trade, travel, and investment promotion in the European country. South African Airways employees who applied for voluntary severance packages can expect to receive their funds by the end of January, according to unions at the airline. The National Transport Movement and South African Transport and Allied Workers Union told their members that the 10.5 billion rand required to fund the SAA Business Rescue Plan and to pay for the severance packages has now been made available to the airline's rescue practitioners from the Department of Public Enterprises. And finally, Kenya's National Treasury sees the Kenyan economy expanding at 6.4% in 2020 after historically low growth rates of 0.6% in 2020. As per government estimates, the Treasury says the economic recovery in 2021 will be driven by the stable macroeconomic environment, ongoing public investments in infrastructure projects, the economic stimulus program, the post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, and improved trade as nations recover from the COVID-19 linked downturn. And that's all from the National Treasury. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Head to our website and download our mobile app on Play Store and Apple iOS. Till next time, I'm Tolulope Adelaru Balogun.